Well, hi everyone, and welcome to Season 3 of That OA Thing, the podcast where we discuss the latest issues from across the Ombudsman landscape. I'm Donal Galligan, Chief Executive of the Ombudsman Association, and to mark Cybersecurity Awareness Month, in today's episode, we'll be hearing from two of our members about the increasing challenges around cybersecurity, fraud, and scams. Joining me today to discuss the issues are Doug Melville, Principal Ombudsman and Chief Executive of the Channel Islands Financial Ombudsman. Welcome, Doug.
Good morning. Glad to be with you today.
And we've got Ian Larkin, Deputy Financial Services and Pensions Ombudsman for Ireland. Hi, Ian.
Hi, Donal. Hi, Doug.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. To start off, could each of you briefly introduce your organisation and explain what role it has in relation to cybersecurity risks? Doug, should we come to you first?
So the Channel Islands Financial Ombudsman, we call it CIFO because that's a bit of a mouthful. We turned 10 years of age in about 8 weeks. We handle complaints about financial services provided in or from the British Channel Islands, the international financial centres of the British Channel Islands of Jersey, Guernsey, Alderney, and Sark. That makes our work very international, but 2/3 of our complainants are resident in the UK and abroad. It's not actually the local community that's the bulk of the work that we do. Our role in cybersecurity has tended to be focused these last 10 years on complaints involving fraud and scams, where customers are caught up in fraudulent use of their accounts or being made to make fraudulent transactions out of their bank accounts. And when it all comes to light, then the issue is who's responsible for it. But we're also, like many other businesses and operations on the island, we are ourselves an operation subject to cybersecurity risk. So from that perspective, I think we bring the same perspective as many small businesses in the community that can also be the generators of complaints that come to our office. Beyond the individual complaints, of course, like all ombudsman schemes, part of the hidden value of our operation is providing the feedback, the evidence that comes from the casework that we do that feeds into regulators and helps them prioritize their work in this emerging space, but also to government as well to help drive public policy. In many ways, we describe ourselves as the canary in the coal mine out there. So I'll leave it at that, Donal. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here this morning.
No, it's good to have you. And Ian, could you tell us a little bit about FSPO and explain your role?
Yeah, so the role of the Financial Services and Pensions Ombudsman, we're based in the Republic of Ireland, is to resolve complaints from consumers, which includes small businesses and other organisations against financial service providers and pension providers. So the Financial Service and Pensions Ombudsman, which you'll sometimes hear referred to as the FSPO, everyone has a shortened version of their name. We were founded in 2018. There was organisations prior to that, but our legislation came in place for 2018. So since its formation, we've seen disputed transactions becoming increasingly a prevalent part of our work. So in 2024, nearly a third of all banking complaints included conducts that we'd group underneath the heading of disputed transactions. That's in the region of 1,000 complaints out of around 3,400 banking complaints. Similar to Doug, I think one of the values that we have is increasing awareness of matters. And so we publish case studies that detail some of the things that we've seen. And I think similar to Doug, I don't think this is purely an Irish or a Channel Islands or Great Britain. This is very much an international phenomena, and likewise, we feed information into our regulator, into the financial service provider regulator, the Central Bank of Ireland, who likewise feed information into the European Banking Authority and the European Central Bank. So this is very much an evolving area, and I think the more information that can be shared, the better. So I think that gives a good overview of the space we're in relation to this.
It does, yeah. Thank you very much for that. You touched a little bit on some of the common things that you see. I think it'd be helpful if both of you could talk a little bit about what are some of the most common scams and cybersecurity challenges that you currently see in your work. Doug, should we come to you first on that?
Well, from a financial consumer perspective, we're seeing fraudsters using the sense of urgency and familiarity and even the technical jargon to their advantage to try and gain customers' trust. So these are the tactics that put people at risk and highlight why raising awareness is so essential here. But essentially what we're seeing is a combination of channels used, whether it's text messages, typical SMS messages, whether it's emails trying to get people to launch attachments, they're phishing scams, or whether they're phone calls catching people during the dinner hour completely unawares. And they're putting people immediately into a high stress, pressurized situation where they're trying to first gain their trust, convincing them that it's either their bank or the regulator or sometimes even law enforcement on the line, and trying to convince them of the fact that their money's at risk, and then walking them through steps to take action to protect their money, which in fact is how the bad guys are separating you from your money. They are getting you to compromise the very technology and security protocols that are put in place to protect your money and to protect both the provider, often a bank, and yourself from the very scammers that are on the line talking you through their script, not ours this morning.
Yeah, that's a real. It's a little bit too clever of them, really, isn't it, to turn the awareness that we're raising about this, and then they turn that against the consumer. Ian, is it similar in the most common things that you're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, no, it's very much similar. So again, what we see is fraudsters seeking to manipulate consumers using fear and urgency to prompt payments. Again, using common impersonation tactics, pretending to be banks, as you said, delivery services, police, even postal services, using text, not just emails, text messages, other forms of social media communications to impersonate people. They're relying, I suppose, sometimes on the trust that people have engendered in other formats, and again, it's consumers in the broadest sense we see this happening with. So one of our case studies is, it's the, unfortunately, I think you see examples across this, the sort of the CEO sort of type scam. So small businesses, they contact and pretend to be the CEO or someone very senior in an organization and look to get payments. We gave an example now in one of our case studies that's on our website, where a person in the finance department was contacted on Monday. Somehow the fraudster was aware that the CEO was in another jurisdiction and asked the person to transfer the money to that jurisdiction and to an account, and it all looked quite believable. Likewise did again the Tuesday. So it again is that urgency, the use of information that somehow they garner, or sheer numbers. I mean, the fraudsters here are sending out an awful lot of these messages every day. So sometimes it's just they're using the technology, unfortunately, to technology a lot of benefits, but this has enabled them to probably have a broader reach. Coming back to the international aspect of it, they're not just sending it in Ireland or England, the Channel Islands, Great Britain, all across Europe. So I think it is very, very similar. That fear and urgency is something that we see time and time again in these messages to prompt people to take actions that they perhaps wouldn't take absent that.
Yeah, the way you both set it out, the sheer kind of volume of it, and then, as you say, the tactics of playing on a fear and urgency, it's easy to see why these things are successful in moving it forward. What are some of the practical steps that organisations or individuals can take to enhance that cyber resilience? Doug, a little smile from you. Should we come to you first?
If you're looking at us as organizations that are ourselves targets, there's one answer. If you're looking at the advice we would have for consumers, it's the other. So perhaps
let's go for consumers. Let's go for consumers first, and then
let's tackle consumers first. I think the issue for the average consumer is that they're operating in an environment where there's an avalanche of online information. I mean, we're all, myself included, sometimes flipping through our phones, skimming through the stuff that's being fed to us by algorithms elsewhere, trying to market and sell us information and convince us what to think and how to vote. The reality is you're not going to get the warnings out there clearly being recognized and processed by consumers in an environment with that kind of avalanche of online information. So the challenge is to create consumers who are aware. For them, you want them reading about fraud and scams. And I think for us, the secret sauce is the case studies that Ian mentioned earlier, because through case studies, people see themselves. And they see their friends and family, and they see circumstances that, even if they haven't had it themselves, it's a bit like an Aesop's fable. It's a story, but with a point at the end of it that people can take away. And they're more likely to remember those types of stories than just being told, be careful, don't do this. Or, when someone calls, don't trust it's from them. When they get a call and on their mobile, it looks like it's the number that they know is the one on the back of their bank card, they start from a position of trust. And we've heard the recordings from some of these guys. They're really, really good. So I think the message for consumers is be careful, to trust but verify, but also take proactive steps. Update all your passwords and PINs. Don't write them down or reuse them. It's amazing what the bad guys can buy off the dark web. And if you're not updating your stuff, chances are the passwords and logins that you've used over the last few years are out there to be bought by the highest bidder out there on the dark web. Use a password app to keep them secure, but also to give you access to them when you need them. The other thing is about never feel rushed. Stop and think before you act. Treat every unsolicited communication, whether it's an SMS, an email, or a phone call, as inherently suspicious. And these days, even if you think you recognize who's on the phone, AI can duplicate friends and family or colleagues at work so well that you actually can't even assume that anymore. And I know that's a leap for most of us when you pick up the phone and you know the voice and go, hi, Tony, how you doing? Are you free for lunch? But if Tony says he's in a bind and needs you to send him £1,000, if you think it's Tony, that's what friends do for each other. And the bad guys know that. So that the trust and the relationships that you have are exactly the type of thing that the bad guys are trying to manipulate and use against you. Do staff training at work. That helps your employer, but it also helps you to be made aware, because it's often training online that runs you through the scenarios. And you start spotting the patterns yourself. Have your office systems penetration tested, because we have people who do get actually scammed at work with stuff. And it's amazing how we drop our guard when we're in our familiar environments. And if you're driving, don't pick up the phone. It's amazing how many situations I've dealt with where people, because they're already picking up a call while they're driving, they're distracted. And when they're put under that added pressure, they're not thinking as clearly as they might when they were, frankly, disturbed during dinner and they're hostile about it, and they're already feeling indisposed to having a long conversation with the person on the end of the phone. It's remarkable. We're up against the A-team out there and the bad guys. It's ex-KGB and FSB people. They're writing the scripts for teams around the world. And we have to be better than that. This is a battle that I think if you look at it in terms of growth, we're losing. And we need to get on the front foot and get ahead of it for a change.
That sounds like great advice. Ian, any thoughts on that? Is there anything there that you'd build on or add?
Well, I think similar to Doug, I think people respond to stories. So the fraudsters are using stories. So again, in the Financial Services and Pensions Ombudsman, ourselves, along with other Irish bodies such as the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission here, we took part in Global Money Week, which is an annual OECD financial awareness to help grow financial literacy. And as part of that, the case studies are very important. So our ombudsman, Liam Sloyan, presented some videos on this. And I think we've got to get the stories out there, got to get the information out there. And there's multi-actors in this. So, ombudsmen play a part. We had, as I said, the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission were part of that. There are revenue commissioners were part of it, because, this is happening across many different spheres. And similar to what Doug was saying, actually, our central bank actually came up with a nice sort of acronym for a test that they say people should do, which is a SAFE test, which is, stop. So the first letter being S, so stop. Ask yourself who, what, and why. Do I feel rushed to act? Assess. Make sure that the firm is contacting you or the number is the correct number. Similar to that, do a fact check, check online, check that the web address is the correct web address. And then, very importantly, to keep that information flow, if you have been either an actual victim or potential victim of this, report it to the relevant authorities. It's very important that information of these scams sort of are similar, but they keep sort of changing. The method of communication keeps changing, the script keeps changing a little bit. So it's very important that the information on what are the current ones get out there. We all, through personal or what we see in front of our files here. We all hear about the latest text, and I suppose the positives of the technology is that it's easier now once information is shared to get it out to people, to share those stories to people who may be getting the next email or the next text.
That's interesting, and I know we said we'd focus first on what's the kind of advice to consumers, and that's really interesting as well. To both of you making that point about that it's stories that people respond to, and need to make sure that there's the appetite in the media and elsewhere to promote and enhance the kind of voice around that. Doug, I know at another event I've heard you talk before on this subject and talk about how the individual, us, that we're probably the weakest link in the chain. But I guess just to kick the tires a little bit on that, to both of you, are banks and providers doing enough to protect consumers from scams in the first place? And then when it does occur, how are they reacting? Are they reacting in a way that you think is absolutely online, or is there some room for improvement there?
You're putting us on the hot seat here, given our role, aren't you? And we're not advocates for either party, but what we see informs public policy. I don't like what I'm seeing. All this money that's being spent out there on technology is doing a wonderful job at making banking systems and payment systems secure. The AI is being used to sniff out the transactions, identify, the high probability fraudulent ones. But where is the investment in giving the consumer a way of knowing when someone calls them that it is who they say they are? There's no other side to that equation. When a bank phones me, how do I know it's the bank? And I think that gap is left a huge hole in a very high and strong wall, but it's made us the weakest link, as you pointed out. I think that in all this system, the bad guys know that we as the consumer are the way in. And I think the challenge for that is that the bad guys know that since COVID, you've got a lot more of us who maybe previously were more dependent on a branch-based, in-person type model of financial services delivery, are now less savvy, are now less tuned to where some of the risks are. And I think for the initial few years after COVID, that created a target-rich environment. And the bad guys have really gone all in on this area. And I think we're seeing the aftermath of that. And growth numbers, Ian talked of his, depending on the time period you choose for ours, we're up over 1,000% in terms of fraud-related complaints that we're resolving in our office. It's terrifying. And I think having more warnings in the form of emails, more warnings as you go through the process, isn't enough when in fact we're finding ourselves overloaded with information, unfamiliar with the risks until we're the victim. And there's an element of vulnerability here that I think people ignore. When we're in these situations and we're on the phone with someone who sounds like my bank, talks like my bank, uses the jargon of my bank, and frankly knows some details about my personal financial affairs like my bank would, I believe. And once they have that belief, they're 90% of the way home, because they talk me into doing things to be a responsible customer, to take action, to protect the money, to cooperate with my bank, to do what a good customer feels they should be doing. Stop. Trust but verify. It's a very, very difficult environment, and it leaves us as ombuds folk in the difficult position of apportioning the loss between two victims, between the provider, bank or other type, and the customer. It's not apportioning it to the bad guys. They're out, they've got the money, they've left. It's apportioning the loss between provider and customer. And we're taking the bold step, and as you know, there have been conversations across the EU and around the world about this. The test we feel is the right one is that anything short of gross negligence, the industry are the ones that have this system and that have left the consumer as the weakest link. That's going to be the determining factor for us. And that's not popular, as I'm sure you can appreciate. That's creating a high bar for industry to meet. But frankly, it's their system, not the customers. And
yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot. And interlocking elements here. I think regular listeners will not be surprised to hear me say collaboration is often key in tackling cross-sector challenges. How can organisations, whether they're financial providers or our own members, work together to combat cyber threats? Any thoughts? Who wants to come in first?
I'll just say some initial words. So I think what we've touched on earlier in terms of sharing the stories when we're at the conferences, make people aware of what we're seeing recently. At a recent conference, I spoke to Doug, and Doug gave me some examples of what they are seeing, which again were simple. But that information sharing, and I know this isn't just between ombudsmen, but I know the information sharing from between ombudsmen and say their providers and their regulators. So for example, I know the providers are providing a lot of information to the European Banking Authority and the European Central Bank, who actually in 2024 produced an interesting report on payment fraud. So I think that formal and informal sharing of information is crucial. The micro, the individual stories, and the macro, the data.
Doug, I know in general you're a big fan and a big supporter of collaboration. What's your thoughts around this?
I'll also be crass about it for you, Donal. When you've got something like this that's topical and interesting, it's also an opportunity for us. Often people don't realize ombudsmen are out there until they have the need themselves around a complaint. But when you've got something topical like this, it's our ticket to the game to be part of that broader conversation. Nothing gets me an invitation to speak to a community group like coming out and giving them some tips on how to prevent themselves from falling prey to scams and frauds and the like. And I think it's also an opportunity for us to enhance people's understanding of what we are and what we're not. Our role in the whole public policy ecosystem out there around issues like this that are really important, and where there are members in our community that are falling prey. And I think for every opportunity to be out there and spreading the message and sharing the stories through case studies and others is preventing 1, 2, 3 cases that are not just cases that we would have to deal with in our office, but averting some really awful, traumatic circumstances for people in our community. And you think back 10 plus years ago, the World Health Organization came out early and said, when seniors have these types of issues affecting their financial affairs, it hastens death for people. The stress is so awful. And they've been through their working years. Their ability to recover financially from these circumstances is really hampered at that point in their lives. And that's something that we should not forget. We talk about these as policy issues and challenges for our offices. But at the end of all these stories are people being victimized and traumatized and put in awful financial situations in an otherwise already upsetting economic situation in our communities and around the world. And I think it's a helpful reconnection to the community when we can be out there delivering this type of useful information and being part of the solution. Like most ombudsmen, we'd much rather be preventing problems than picking up the mess off the highway after the fact.
Yeah, I can see Ian nodding along to that. I think that's a really helpful point. Ian, did you want to come in?
Well, I think I think the goal of every ombudsman is to reduce the complaints that come down to us to near zero, right? And I think that is where the information sharing comes in. Even the simple messages. If some investment things seem too good to be true, stop and think about it. Even that simple message getting out there and repeated is very, very important. So I think as ombudsman, that's crucial where we can assist that. I mean, it's great where we can assist people, but it's even better where they actually don't need to make use of an ombudsman service.
Yeah, it's a really helpful reminder, isn't it, that outreach, that story sharing, that feedback is not just about talking about reporting on what's already happened. It's about to try and inform things and prevent things going forward. As we touched on, obviously scams not only affect individual consumers, also businesses as well, small and large. You've already hinted at this, but are the issues and solutions there different? And I guess a further question is, how can leaders drive a cybersecurity aware culture in an organization? Doug, should we come back to you first? Because I had to pause you on getting into this earlier on.
Yeah. I think the number one thing leaders can do is to create a culture in their organization where every single individual on the team feels empowered to put up the hand and go, stop. I'd rather have someone who thinks they're on a video call with me and I'm asking them to do something that's off policy. I want them to call me on it, because chances are I either am trying to do them something off policy and I'm creating the risk, or it's an AI generated image of me that's trying to get someone to do something. And either way, I want everyone in my organization to hold up their hand and stop and be part of the solution. And that's a cultural issue, but it's also training. So I think you lead with the cultural piece and you follow it up with training for the individuals, good policies and procedures that focus on those risky aspects. We handle a lot of very sensitive personal private information on behalf of complainants and providers, and in some ways as sensitive as that of regulators as well. We should be held to no lesser standard in terms of the care we take in avoiding becoming cybersecurity victims. We've got a fellow office in our membership that is really living through that vividly these last couple of years. The operational impacts are catastrophic. And you know what? We're all operating lean, and to lose 6 months of productivity and try and regain that over a few years, it's like digging out from under a backlog of cases that just, we've all been there. It's not a situation any of us would take lightly, and it keeps us from doing the day job effectively. So I think it's a big new piece of leadership puzzle for us. And it's about also getting our boards aware of the risk and aware of what investment that means for our offices, so that we can be on our front foot, not chasing the problem on our back foot all the time. And that comes down to budget season as well. I think we have to bravely tell the story that we're not as strong as we will need to be going forward in this broader battle.
Ian, what's your thoughts? What could leaders do to help make a difference?
For SMEs in every business, I think the shift has happened, but it's good to remind yourself, cybersecurity isn't just about the guys who work in information technology. It's actually central to every business's strategy. So just keeping that front and foremost is crucial. I mean, the benefits of technology are huge, but you have to be aware of how to use them. What's the correct way of using them? What's the incorrect way? So I think, back to Doug's piece, that's a cultural piece. For most businesses, most people, that is ingrained, but it's always good to remind yourself, because the moment someone forgets, that's the moment something will happen.
At one of our conferences a couple of years ago, we had someone from the British Library come along who've been very open with the impact on their operation. What I always found most interesting from that report, really open report, which they published, it's open for everyone to have a look at, but it was the fact that these issues were on the radar of the board, were on the radar of the executive committee. But because of those other pressures and the rest of it, it was a bit of we can get to that eventually. So I think that's a really good point about it's not just about one individual, it's about the organization, it's about the board, it's about that governance support as well. One of the things that we've already touched on is the changing nature of engagement with financial services and the rest of it. Digitalization is certainly the word on everyone's lips, and AI is supposedly the solution to every problem under the sun. One of the things that really caught my eye, I was surprised to see, maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but it was something that in the UK last year, something like £3.5 million was lost to fraudulent QR codes. And you think how new that is. This is something that people wouldn't have used before, and are now told this is something super convenient you should use all the time. So with that in mind, with that shift, more instant payments, more QR codes, more mobile banking, how are both of your organizations preparing for new kinds of disputes? Ian, shall I come to you first?
Well, I think some of the methods, the technological methods may be new. So the QR code, quishing, I think, is the unfortunate term that seems to be used for it now. The underlying tactics that are being used are very similar. It's, creating that sense of urgency. It's using information. So what we're doing is we're scanning the environment. So we're keeping ourselves aware. So probably, similar to every country, we have a national cybersecurity center, and they produced, for example, a very good recent report on the use of QR codes and their dangers. But when you look actually what's in it in terms of how those QR codes are being used in certain circumstances. It's similar to a phishing email. The email comes in, and instead of having an attachment, there's a QR code attached to it. But again, it's getting past that level of trust. So I think what we're really seeing is, again, it's the communication piece that is, stop, be aware. As a new type of technology comes in, the same sort of tactics may be used. So just the fundamentals of checking, and I think Doug mentioned earlier, updating your software, updating your passwords, checking the website. So again, a QR code is being used. They'll bring you to a website that looks very good, but again, check the web address, reach out to the actual provider. Is this actually something they provide? So really, I think it's that scanning, but I think an awful lot of the fundamentals will probably remain, unfortunately, similar. It's just a change in some of the technological methods of delivery, for want of a better term, that they may start using.
Could see you nodding along there, Doug. What's your thoughts?
It's moving so fast. Thankfully, it's interesting. Because it's interesting, we are watching. We're reading the 1 and 2 pagers that hit our inbox every day from the various newsfeed services that I'm sure most of us are subscribing to, just to try and keep ahead of this wave. Local cybersecurity bodies are putting on lunch and learns. So you don't just go yourself, you take the whole gang from the office. You want everyone to be aware. We're in the business of pattern spotting, aren't we? That's the job we do. Turn that in terms of spotting the patterns for what's coming down the pipe for us in the future. Industry is using AI. We need to be playing with it ourselves so that we understand how it works and see where the applications may be. But whatever we're doing, the bad guys have more. They've got more AI, more money, more experience. And you know what? The only way we're going to be a tougher target than the person next to us is by staying on top of this ourselves. That's for our own offices. For consumers, all we can be is part of the story out there that inoculates them to the extent that we can. You're not going to eliminate it. It's fighting the good fight in the best way we can with the limited resources that we're given. But this is just getting rolling, guys. I can't imagine what this is going to feel like in another 5 years.
Yeah, crikey. I guess one of the things that reassures me a bit is that point, Ian, that you were making, that okay, it's using technology in new ways, but the nature behind it, as you say, the QR code, how is that any different to a phishing email? That SAFE acronym is definitely going to stick with me. I think that's a really useful one. Whoever came up with that, I hope they got a nice gold star for that one.
I have to give kudos to our Central Bank of Ireland. I can't say it's me, but it is just, again, I think that's why it's very important to actually talk, ombudsman, regulators, providers, sharing that information.
I think the other thing that I found really interesting was the point about the changing culture as well, and that point you were making, Doug, about maybe you need to become more comfortable with leaders need to become more comfortable with being challenged back on things, because if it's coming from a place of that safety. And I was just thinking an anecdotal thing the other day. I was paying for something online for my son, and I got mildly irritated with the multi-factor authentication of now I've got to get sent a text message and oh god, and I'm going to have to put this in and the rest of it. But I guess it's just as you need a culture change in organizations, we need culture change in society to accept these things, realize that there's a reason these things are there, and it's worth the whatever it is, 27 seconds of inconvenience to do this thing for the additional protection it brings. Go on. Sorry, Doug, did you want
to? I think that's absolutely true. But I think there's also, from a leadership perspective, know that most of us in leadership roles are the primary target. We are most active out there in the community. Our identities are more easily searched and processed. And our staff tend to defer when we ask for something or when someone purports to be us asking for something. It's really for us to lead by saying we're the vulnerable point in the organization. Perhaps it's for us to be now the most careful and to share that cultural message with our teams to say, I know I'm the challenge here, so push back. Let's make sure that as an organization, none of us are the instrument of it, starting with those of us in leadership roles.
It's actually interesting, if I might say, Donald, the point you made that you personally felt a little bit, I'm wasting my 27 seconds with the strong customer authentication. The Central Bank and the European Bank Authority report was actually, look, their stats will show that actually helps strong customer authentication. It helps reduce fraud in those instances. But one thing that we have seen in some instances is transfer of funds internationally where a jurisdiction may not have that. And again, back to your point, people may prey on that. Well, actually, if you send the money here, you don't have to spend your 20 seconds or your 30 seconds. So again, that's something just to be aware of. There is a point to that strong customer authentication. Like, taking that time to do it actually can make you safe.
Yeah, understanding that there's a reason for this, and it's a valuable thing, and actually the absence of it should perhaps be a red flag as well. Well, look, I think that's potentially a good place to leave it on. Both of you, thank you so much for joining us today and shedding light on this complex world and what can be done. So thank you, Doug.
Always a pleasure, Donald. Thanks for getting the group together to hear this important stuff. Much appreciated.
And thank you, Ian, as well.
Thank you, Donald. A pleasure.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning in to That OA Thing. If you or someone you know has been affected by the issues we've discussed today, do please seek help from the relevant Ombudsman scheme or other relevant bodies from wherever you're based. If you found today's episode interesting, please share with your colleagues, your networks, and on social media to raise awareness and keep everyone vigilant against cyber threats and scams. Think safe is definitely the thing I'm taking from this. As always, you can stay connected with us on LinkedIn, X, Instagram, and Threads under Ombudsman Association. And don't forget to subscribe to That OA Thing on either Spotify or YouTube so you don't miss future episodes. Hopefully you'll join us again next time. And until then, please do stay safe and secure online.